Rachel Thompson moved gracefully across the glittering ballroom, her champagne-colored dress catching the light of the chandeliers. The charity gala was alive with chatter and laughter, a sea of elegant gowns and sharp suits. Waiters weaved between the crowd with trays of wine, while a soft jazz band played in the background. Rachel smiled politely, exchanging greetings with judges, politicians, and fellow attorneys. To anyone watching, she looked like the perfect picture of poise and calm. But beneath her calm face, Rachel carried the weight of years of silence. Her hands trembled slightly when no one was looking, and her smile was more of a mask than an expression. Tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight was meant to be her night, though she had no idea just how special it was about to become. Then the doors opened, and Mark Thompson entered. Her husband's tall frame filled the doorway, his sharp eyes scanning the room with irritation. He was known for his charm in courtrooms and boardrooms, but his expression tonight was far from charming. His jaw was tight, his movements brisk, his irritation clear to anyone who noticed. Rachel's stomach tightened. She knew that look. Mark walked straight toward her, cutting through the crowd. Conversations hushed as people sensed the tension. Rachel turned to greet him, whispering softly, "Mark, please, not here." But his face was set, his voice low and edged with anger. "You think you can parade around here without me?" he snapped under his breath. Before she could respond, he grabbed her wrist. Not gently, not privately, but firmly enough to draw gasps from those standing nearby. The music continued, but the room itself seemed to freeze. Rachel's glass slipped from her free hand, shattering on the polished floor. "Mark, stop," she whispered, panic in her eyes, but he pulled her roughly toward the exit. The grip on her wrist tightened, his anger spilling into every step. Whispers rippled through the guests. Some looked away in embarrassment, others watched with wide eyes. A few lifted their phones, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. Rachel's cheeks burned. She had spent years hiding his temper behind closed doors, keeping up appearances, convincing herself she could endure it. But this was different. This was public. Humiliation poured over her as Mark dragged her out, her heels clicking helplessly against the marble floor. What neither Mark nor most of the crowd knew was that Rachel wasn't just another guest tonight. She wasn't there simply as his wife, standing in his shadow. She had been invited as the surprise guest of honor. In only minutes, the host was meant to announce her name, celebrating her for her groundbreaking legal work defending women who had suffered abuse. Now those same women, and dozens of powerful people in the city, watched her leave in silence, torn between shock and disbelief. A few of them exchanged knowing looks, their admiration for Rachel deepening even in this moment of pain. Rachel's eyes glistened as she glanced back over the sea of faces. She saw pity, she saw whispers, but she also felt something stirring inside her. Shame filled her, but behind it, a quiet, growing rage began to take root. And as the doors closed behind her, shutting out the glitter and applause, Rachel realized this moment would not break her. It would mark the beginning of something she could no longer avoid. Once full of promise, now poisoned by control. That was the story of Rachel and Mark's marriage. When they first met, Rachel believed she had found her perfect partner. Mark was confident, ambitious, and persuasive. He could light up a room with his charm, making everyone laugh and listen. In those early days, Rachel felt lucky to be chosen by a man so admired. He praised her beauty, encouraged her studies, and told her he wanted a wife as strong and intelligent as she was. But as the years passed, the mask slipped. The same man who once praised her sharp mind began mocking her ideas. The laughter she had loved turned into cutting remarks. At home, away from the admiring public, Mark's charm vanished. He demanded obedience, questioned her every choice, and made her feel small. Rachel, who once dreamed of a marriage built on partnership, found herself walking on eggshells, always cautious not to provoke his temper. Mark's world was built on appearances. In public, he played the role of the loving husband and brilliant lawyer. People admired how polished they looked together, the perfect couple. Yet behind closed doors, Rachel endured his sharp tongue, his constant criticism, his habit of controlling even the smallest parts of her life. He dictated what she wore, who she spoke to, even how long she stayed at work. He reminded her often that he was the successful one, and she should be grateful to live in his shadow. But Rachel was not as weak as he believed. Beneath her calm and quiet surface burned a passion and strength that even Mark could not destroy. She had built a career of her own, one that reflected her deepest values. As an attorney, she had chosen to stand for those who had no voice, women trapped in abusive relationships, women overlooked by the system, women who needed someone to believe in them. Ironically, her work mirrored her own life, though she rarely admitted it, even to herself. Rachel knew the law well, and she knew how power could be twisted into chains. In her office, she fought tirelessly to break those chains for others. In her home, she carried invisible ones herself. Every time she sat across from a client, listening to her story, Rachel felt a stab of recognition. She promised them safety and hope, even as she returned each night to her own cage. The one person who saw glimpses of Rachel's truth was Emily, her best friend and fellow lawyer. Emily had known Rachel since law school. She admired her brilliance and her kindness, but she also noticed the hesitation in Rachel's eyes whenever Mark's name came up. Emily asked questions gently, careful not to push too hard, but she could sense the cracks in Rachel's marriage. "You don't deserve to be treated like that," Emily once whispered after Mark had spoken harshly at a dinner party. Rachel only smiled tightly and changed the subject. Emily tried to be patient, waiting for the day Rachel would confide in her fully. Until then, she stood nearby, offering quiet support. She knew Rachel was stronger than she realized, but she also knew how fear could chain even the bravest heart. What Rachel had not shared with Mark, and only partly with Emily, was the importance of the case she was working on. It wasn't just another file on her desk. It was a fight against a wealthy and influential man accused of abusing his partner. The case carried high stakes, not only for her client but for Rachel herself. If she won, it would mark her as one of the most courageous attorneys in her field, a defender of women whose voices were silenced. But she also knew victory would not come without a price. The accused man had powerful allies, and whispers already reached Rachel that his lawyers were prepared to use every weapon against her. And there was another layer of danger she could not ignore: Mark's pride. He hated seeing Rachel succeed, especially when the spotlight leaned her way instead of his. A win this big would challenge not just the abuser in court, but also the man she lived with at home. Rachel carried that weight quietly, balancing her work with her marriage like someone walking a thin rope. She told herself she could endure, that her silence at home was worth the difference she made for others. But deep down, she knew her silence would not last forever. The cracks were growing, spreading through every part of her life. And though she did not yet realize it, the night of the gala had already begun to split her world in two. The day after the gala humiliation, Rachel sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee she had barely touched. Her wrists still ached faintly where Mark had gripped her, and the memory of hundreds of eyes watching her shame followed her like a shadow. She tried to focus on her notes for work, but the sound of the phone ringing startled her. When she answered, a warm but hesitant voice greeted her. "Rachel? This is Claire from the gala committee." Rachel's chest tightened. She braced herself, unsure of what Claire would say. We wanted to check on you," Claire continued gently. "Everyone saw what happened. We were shocked, to say the least. I just need you to know. Last night was meant to honor you. You were our surprise guest of honor. We wanted to recognize your incredible work defending women in abusive situations. You've changed so many lives." Rachel froze, the words hitting her like a wave. Her? The night she had been dragged out in humiliation, the night she had felt so small, was supposed to be a night of celebration. For her. "I'm so sorry you missed it," Claire went on. "We had planned a speech, a tribute video, even a donation drive in your name. Everyone was waiting for you to be called up to the stage when your husband pulled you away." Her voice lowered, as if she feared saying too much. "We understand if you need space, but please know, we respect you, and we admire your work more than ever." Rachel's throat tightened. She managed to thank Claire, her voice trembling. Before hanging up, she sat in silence, staring at the wall, her hands shaking. By noon, 2 more calls came. One from a colleague who said gently, "Word is already spreading, Rachel. People saw everything." Another from a judge who had attended who told her, "Don't let this shake you. We know who you are, and we value your courage." Each call deepened the pit in Rachel's stomach. She had spent years hiding Mark's cruelty behind closed doors, working so carefully to maintain the image of the perfect wife. Now in one night, that image had shattered, not because of her mistakes but because of Mark's rage. And for the first time, Rachel wondered if his power over her was worth the constant silence she endured. That evening, Mark came home early. Rachel sat stiffly on the couch, her phone in her lap. He walked in with his usual sharp energy, tossing his jacket over a chair. His face held no sign of regret. "You embarrassed me last night," he said flatly, loosening his tie. Rachel blinked. "I embarrassed you?" Mark's eyes narrowed. "Do you think I was going to stand there and watch you become the center of attention? Do you think I'd let you shine brighter than me?" His words cut deep. Rachel stared at him, stunned. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't ashamed. He had done it on purpose. "You dragged me out in front of hundreds of people," she whispered. "You humiliated me." Mark shrugged, pouring himself a drink. "Better that than letting you forget your place. People need to remember who carries this family." Rachel's chest tightened, anger and grief rising together. For years she had convinced herself that Mark's temper came from stress, from pressure at work, from anything but what it really was. But now the truth stood in front of her, clear and sharp. He hadn't lost control. He had wanted control. He wanted her silence, her obedience, her smallness. As he sat down across from her, sipping his drink, Rachel felt something stir inside her. It wasn't just pain. It wasn't just shame. It was rebellion, small at first like a spark, but growing. For the first time, she knew she couldn't keep living this way. She didn't say it aloud, not yet. She simply rose from the couch, her eyes colder than he had ever seen. Mark smirked, confident in his grip over her. But deep down, Rachel knew something had shifted. She could no longer unhear his words. She could no longer unsee the truth. And in that moment, a decision began to form in her heart, quiet, dangerous, and unstoppable. Mark's control tightens. After the gala, his temper grew sharper, his words colder. He began checking Rachel's phone when she wasn't looking, scrolling through her messages, questioning every call. If she came home late from work, he demanded to know why. If she laughed too much on the phone with Emily, he accused her of keeping secrets. At the office, Rachel tried to bury herself in her work. She met with women who carried bruises not just on their skin but in their hearts. She listened, advised, and gave them courage. Yet every story she heard echoed her own. She knew what it felt like to shrink under someone's shadow, to live in fear of anger that could explode at any time. Still, she never admitted her own truth. Instead, she sat quietly across from her clients, promising them safety while hiding her own scars. Mark hated Rachel's growing recognition. Whenever her name appeared in legal circles or in small articles praising her work, he mocked her. "Don't get ahead of yourself," he sneered. "They're only using you to look good. No one takes you seriously." He would tear apart her notes, calling them weak. Sometimes he hid important documents from her desk, forcing her to scramble before meetings. Rachel began working in secret, keeping her files locked away, carrying them with her instead of leaving them at home. She learned to protect her work the way she once protected her own emotions. Emily noticed the change. She saw the way Rachel's smile never quite reached her eyes anymore, the way her shoulders stiffened whenever Mark's name was mentioned. One evening, Emily leaned across Rachel's office desk and said softly, "You don't have to stay in this, Rachel. You don't deserve this life." Rachel's hands froze over her papers. For a moment, she wanted to open her mouth, to let the truth spill out. But fear closed her throat. She thought of the whispers of people saying she had failed as a wife, of Mark's threats about what he would do if she ever tried to leave. So she forced a small smile and said, "I'm fine." "Really?" Emily sighed, knowing it wasn't true, but she didn't push further. Instead, she stayed close, always ready to listen if Rachel ever chose to speak. As Rachel's biggest case grew, so did the risks. Her client was a young woman who had suffered years of abuse at the hands of a wealthy, influential man. Rachel poured herself into the case, determined to win not just for her client, but for all the women whose voices had been silenced. She studied every detail, prepared every argument, knowing the outcome could shape her career. Then came the blow she never expected. One morning, while reviewing new documents, Rachel froze at the name on the opposing counsel list. The abuser she was prosecuting was a major client of Mark's law firm. Her heart pounded as the truth sank in. This wasn't just another case anymore. It was a war waiting to erupt inside her own marriage. That evening, she brought it up carefully. "Mark," she began, her voice steady though her stomach churned. "The case I'm handling, your firm represents him." Mark's lips curled into a smirk. "Of course we do. Do you really think you can win against us?" Rachel swallowed hard. "This isn't about us. It's about justice." Mark leaned closer, his voice sharp. "Justice? Don't fool yourself. You're going to embarrass yourself and drag my name down with you. Drop the case, Rachel." But Rachel didn't answer. For the first time, she didn't agree or stay silent. She turned away, her jaw tight, holding in her rage. From that moment, Mark's sabotage became deliberate. He began calling her late at night during her office hours, demanding she come home. He accused her of betraying him, of trying to ruin his career. When she ignored him, he slammed doors, shouted, and threatened that if she kept going, she'd regret it. Yet Rachel continued. She met her client in quiet offices, listened to her fears, and promised she would not give up. The more Mark tried to crush her, the more determined she became. Each insult, each attempt to break her spirit, only reminded her why this case mattered. She wasn't just fighting for her client, she was fighting for herself. Still, fear weighed heavy. At night, lying beside Mark in silence, she wondered if she was strong enough. What if she lost? What if the court ruled against her client? It wouldn't just mean failure in her career. It would mean victory for Mark, proof that he was right, that she was weak, that she should never have dared to step out of his shadow. The thought kept her awake, staring at the ceiling while Mark slept soundly beside her. The courtroom was no longer just about justice. It had become the battlefield of her own life. Winning meant freedom, for her client, and perhaps one day for herself. Losing meant giving Mark the final word, sealing the silence she had carried for years. Rachel knew she couldn't afford to fail. Not this time. Not when everything, her work, her dignity, her very sense of self, was at stake. Rachel stands against Mark in trial, her heart pounding as she rose from her seat. The courtroom was full, the air heavy with anticipation. At one table sat Rachel and her client, a young woman whose voice had long been silenced. At the other sat Mark, polished and confident, representing the wealthy man accused of abuse. To the public, it looked like just another high-stakes case. But for Rachel, it was more than that. It was her life on the line. She wasn't only defending her client, she was defending herself, her dignity, her right to exist outside of Mark's shadow. When Mark stood to speak, his voice carried easily through the room. He smiled at the jury, his charm turned up to full strength. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began smoothly, "we must not be fooled by emotions or dramatic stories. My client is a respected man. A man whose reputation is being unfairly attacked. The opposing counsel," he gestured toward Rachel, "is letting her personal feelings cloud her judgment. She is young, inexperienced, and frankly, too emotional to separate truth from exaggeration." Rachel's face burned, but she kept her posture tall. This wasn't the first time he had mocked her, but it was the first time he did it publicly, in front of strangers who would decide the outcome. She forced herself to breathe slowly, remembering her notes, remembering her client's trembling voice when she first told her story. When it was her turn, Rachel rose with calm determination. "With respect," she said firmly, looking the jury in the eyes, "this is not about me. This is about a woman who has lived in fear, a woman who deserves to be heard. Abuse doesn't vanish because a man has wealth or influence. It doesn't disappear because his lawyer is skilled at hiding it. The truth is simple, and today, we will bring it into the light." The back and forth grew intense. Mark fired questions at Rachel's client, twisting her words, trying to make her stumble. He raised his voice, scoffed, rolled his eyes. "You expect us to believe this?" he sneered. "You stayed with him for years, and now suddenly you call it abuse?" Rachel objected, her voice sharp and steady. The judge warned Mark more than once to keep his tone professional. But Mark's arrogance only grew. He was certain he could crush both Rachel and her client under the weight of his experience. Then came the twist that no one expected. As Rachel prepared to present her final evidence, the courtroom doors opened. Emily walked in quietly, carrying a small device. She nodded at Rachel, her eyes firm with support. Rachel felt her chest tighten. She knew what this was. "Your Honor," Rachel said carefully, "with the court's permission, I'd like to introduce a recording that directly relates to this case. Mark's head snapped toward her. What recording? He demanded, his voice sharp. The judge nodded for her to continue. Rachel pressed play. The courtroom filled with a familiar voice, Mark's voice. Cold, instructive, unmistakable. Listen carefully, the recording said. If she testifies, you say she's lying for money. You show anger, but controlled anger. The court loves confidence. Don't admit anything. I'll make sure we destroy her credibility. No one will believe a weak woman's word against yours. Gasps erupted in the room. Jurors shifted in their seats, eyes wide. The judge raised his brows, looking directly at Mark. Rachel stood tall, her voice clear. This recording was provided by my client and confirmed by independent review. It shows that not only did Mr. Thompson know of his client's abusive behavior, he actively coached him on how to deceive this court. Mark's face drained of color. He jumped to his feet. This is out of context. It's illegal to use. But the judge's gavel struck firmly. Sit down, Mr. Thompson. This is highly relevant. Rachel's client wept softly, relief washing over her face. Emily gave Rachel a small nod of encouragement from the back of the room. Rachel continued, her voice unwavering. This case is not about tricks. It is not about power or reputation. It is about truth. And the truth is that this woman was abused. The truth is that people in power tried to silence her. But today her voice is heard. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Mark sat stiffly, his jaw clenched, but the damage was done. His reputation, built so carefully over the years, was crumbling in front of everyone. Lawyers whispered, jurors stared, and even his client looked betrayed. For the first time, Rachel felt the chains loosen. The man who had held her down, mocked her, and dragged her out of the gala was now the one exposed and humiliated. She hadn't just defended her client, she had defended herself. And as the gavel struck to end the day's session, Rachel knew the war was nearly over. For once, she was the one with the upper hand. Rachel wins the case. The jury delivered their verdict, and the courtroom filled with a quiet gasp of relief. Her client was finally free, her abuser held accountable. Tears streamed down the young woman's face as she hugged Rachel tightly, whispering, "Thank you for believing me." For Rachel, it was more than just a legal victory. It felt like the closing of a dark chapter in her own life. She had stood against Mark, against his arrogance and cruelty, and she had not only survived, she had won. News spread quickly. Newspapers and legal circles praised Rachel for her courage and brilliance in court. Her name was no longer just linked to Mark's. It stood alone, strong and respected. People spoke of her as a voice for women, a lawyer who would not bow to power. For Mark, the outcome was devastating. The recording had destroyed his credibility. Within weeks, he faced suspension from the bar, his reputation shattered. Colleagues who once praised him now distanced themselves. Invitations to events stopped coming. The man who had prided himself on charm and control was now reduced to whispers of disgrace. At home, the silence between them was heavy. One evening, Mark finally broke it. He sat at the edge of their bed, his face pale, his voice softer than Rachel had heard in years. "Rachel, I'm sorry. I went too far. I was jealous, angry, but we can fix this. We can start again." Rachel stood in the doorway, her arms folded. For a moment, she looked at him. The man she had once loved, the man she had endured for too long. But she felt nothing now except a calm certainty. "No, Mark," she said firmly. "You didn't just go too far. You built our whole marriage on control, on making me small. I won't live like that anymore." He reached for her, but she stepped back. "I'm done," she continued. "I'm filing for divorce. I need to be free, and I need to be myself, not your shadow." Mark's face twisted with frustration, but Rachel turned and walked out before he could say more. For the first time, she didn't tremble as she closed the door behind her. She felt strong, steady, and free. When word spread of her decision, the same community that had once witnessed her humiliation at the gala now saw her transformation. They no longer whispered about the night Mark dragged her out. Instead, they spoke of the woman who had faced her abuser, both in court and at home, and walked away with dignity. Rachel rebuilt her life step by step. She focused on her clients, her friends, and most importantly, herself. People began to recognize her not as Mark's wife, but as Rachel Thompson, a lawyer, a survivor, and a woman of courage. And as she signed the final papers ending her marriage, Rachel felt lighter than she had in years. She was no longer bound to his control. She was her own person again. Her story had come full circle. From shame to strength, from silence to a voice that could not be ignored. Rachel returns to a new gala a year later. This time, standing tall, her head held high. The ballroom glowed with lights and music, just like before, but everything felt different. She walked in alone, not as someone's wife, but as herself. The room that once witnessed her humiliation now welcomed her with admiration and respect. When her name was called, the applause was loud, steady, and genuine. Rachel stepped onto the stage, her elegant dress flowing as she moved with quiet confidence. She paused for a moment, looking over the crowd, and then spoke into the microphone. "Thank you," she began, her voice calm but strong. "A year ago, I stood in this very place, but not in the way I should have. I was silenced and taken out before I could be honored. Tonight I stand here freely. Not just for myself, but for every person who has felt trapped, belittled, or afraid. Resilience is not about never falling. It's about rising again, no matter how heavy the weight. Respect is not a gift from others. It is something we claim for ourselves. And courage. Courage is standing up even when your knees are shaking." Her words hung in the air, touching every person in the room. People rose to their feet, applauding not just her achievements, but her strength. Rachel's eyes searched the crowd and found Emily, smiling proudly with tears in her eyes. For the first time in years, Rachel smiled back without fear, without doubt. She was free, no longer defined by the man who tried to silence her. Rachel was finally living in her own light. Hi loves, thanks so much for staying till the end. Two hearts, don't forget to like, drop a comment, and hit that subscribe button for more. See you next time. Sparkles.